Good day, brothers and sisters. Today's amazing show. Today we're going to talk about Tartaria. Have you ever heard about Tartaria? You did because you watched Saz Show with Melanie Renaud a few months ago, and she's here with us in the studio. She's amazing, and we're going to talk about Tartaria specifically in Montreal, right? If you never heard about MudFlood or Tartaria, what it is all about, please stay tuned. Glenn's here with us. He's going to educate us about some things like Romanian tablets, which I never heard of. Thanks, it's sort of like Georgia Guidestones here, and that's what he tells me, and he's going to tell us more about it. But if you never heard about Tartaria, this is the amazing show to tune in, and we'll see you in 2 seconds. So, Mel, it's been a while.
It has. I'm happy to be here again on the Saz Show and looking forward to talking more and more about this subject that's very fascinating to me. Tartaria, old civilization, the lies and the history that we've been taught in schools. And let's unlearn and discover different patterns in our history. So, yes, it's very fascinating subject.
You've been traveling a lot, and you've been to New Zealand, you've been to Mexico, so you brought some of the stuff they can share with us too. It's not just limited to Northern Hemisphere, it's throughout. Just in few words, like how would you describe the whole Tartaria thing, like to people that never heard of the subject? Because it sounds like Tartars, right? The Mongolian ego that came from Mongolia, and they basically, it was a very militaristic sort of civilization, riding horses with swords and enslaving a whole bunch of people. They went down all the way to Crimea and as far as Moscow, according to the mainstream legacy history. But Tartaria isn't that, isn't it? What is it?
Well, I do think that it's something that's way bigger. It's an older civilization that was written off history on some levels. The Tartaria word was taken off a lot of maps, of a lot of world maps, taken out of the history that we've been taught. I think there's more than one older civilization that we don't know about. There's a lot that I don't know as well. I have no idea how certain things happen and how some civilization were kind of wiped out of our past. But there's a lot of questions. That's what I've been asking myself a lot of questions. I've been seeing a lot of different things pop up, and there's a lot of things that just don't add up, that just don't make sense. We can see some of the maps here on the screen where we can see Tartaria, Tartari. There's different wording of the name. But what's interesting is that, so supposedly it would have been a civilization that was all over the world. And we can see it today through the architecture, basically. The remaining architecture, the old architecture that is similar, very similar, all over the world. So you'll have, buildings that look the same in Canada, in Europe, in South America, like everywhere. And a lot of those buildings, what's interesting is then if you start looking into it, start looking in how long it took to get built, the timing, when they were built, as supposedly in the history that we're taught, it just doesn't make any sense. Like there's no way that those buildings could have been built in some of the years that they're saying, when they were still like going around on horses and buggies and the streets weren't even paved, nothing, but they were building massive structures. With what material? Where did the material come from? There's a lot of loopholes here. So it's a very fascinating subject, a big rabbit hole to go down into, a lot of different components as well to it.
A lot of the architecture in the world, the super beautiful buildings, the ideology today is that they were built by the Freemasons. What do you feel about that?
There is a whole discussions about the Freemasons. I'm not sure if they were built by the Freemasons. I think the Freemasons definitely know the secrets in the sense that they know the real history. They know that there's been some kind of wipeout, could be due to the mud floods of some kind of event that wiped out some past generation, some past civilization. And I think that that's the thing with the Freemasons and the secrets that they teach you all the way up to the 33rd degree is the truth about our history.
Would the mud floods be under the same category like a Noah's Ark and the great wipeout from all the water, the rains?
Yeah, definitely. Because what I believe happened, and again, this is not like the truth, like there could be different version, but I think there was some kind of cataclysmic event, whether it's a mud flood, whether it's a big flooding, like in Noah's Ark, right? That was represented through different literature later on. But everybody in all the different civilization all over the world, you always have a flood story, right? There's always at some point there was a flood and a lot of people died, but a lot of people survived too. And so I think that's the way that they kind of washed it down in our history to hear about it. Maybe I do think that the Freemasons have something to do with something somewhere. Also, I think they might have something to do more with the way that they rewrote history to control us and to have us think that, oh, we evolved from the monkeys, you know, and we went through and we invented the wheel, and then suddenly we're able to build like structures like this one with no problems. So I think that they're part of the change that like happened in the society and controlling the narrative of what this new history, what we believe is the history that we've been taught, was all programmed and was all organized to keep us small, to keep us not believing that we come from this old civilization. Because if we know that our past, in the past, there was civilization way more advanced than us, that were happy because they weren't being controlled by fear of wars, fear of death, fear of whatever. They were living in a positive environment that was led by love, that was led by healing, that was led by, you know, the beauty. It was such, look at this beautiful building. Like the beauty was everywhere in your life. Now they're making everything, the architecture is, it's
bland,
gross, it's boring. They're making the beauty disappear from everywhere.
Yeah, and I would also add that Darwinianism principles seem to be diminishing today. As the more that the technology is coming out, the more people that are being aware. It seems to be that a lot of people are of the belief system now that no, we didn't come from monkeys. We came from a superior civilization, and we seem to be in a bit of a lull period right now. So it's time maybe to get back to a new renaissance.
Totally. I like that. I'm ready for that.
Well, I got to add something. That you mentioned the flood. You're right. Also, the timelines that seem to be screwed up. You know, we can say at least 1,000 years apart. Like, you know, 1,000 years has been added to a calendar for some reason. There's some traces, evidence of that it's been done. However, I think it's, if you go into even crazier rabbit hole, deeper rabbit hole, to say the reset is something that's like 250 years, maybe even less. Like we can recall 1812, right? 1812, the War of 1812, fires of 1800s. A lot of things have burned, and many, like we're referring to floods, but we also have world fires. You know, we have city fires. We also have discussions of like places like Chicago, for example, modern day Chicago, and all the sky rises and all that stuff that not necessarily have been built, but been rebuilt after the Great Chicago Fire and all that stuff, because it's already been there. And the fires is actually the tool of destroying the old history, destroying the evidence, like a modern day book burning, but, you know, back in the day kind of thing. And it was a controlled demolition. It was the building 7 all over the place. And they do say strategically that every 200 years there's that great reset, some kind of war. There's evidence of, and this is not today's point of today's show, but there's evidence of nuclear war has been done, like evidence of nuclear war with craters in Eastern Europe and up in Russia, and with radioactive decay happening is similar to how it happens with nuclear bomb explosions, and even calculate the trajectory of this, where the bombs could have come like Africa or even places like Australia. So there was some kind of cataclysmic event not so long ago, and by long ago, like 200 years ago. Like think of 1812, for example, War of 1812. War of 1812 was happening where? We know at least North America, right? French were fighting here between the British, and they were also in the States. They were colonizing the North America, right? So they had the whole native thing going on as well. But there was also a big war in Russia. Napoleon was going in 1812. He was in Russia. How is it humanly possible back in the day? Like even population, even population control, right? Like how can you split your army in two and have two major war fronts at the same time going on? Something doesn't add up. And the same thing with like different relations that we have in terms of Russia back in the day was a big friend of the United States, helped post Civil War. There's a lot of evidence of that. Things like West Coast, San Francisco, like they have things like Russian Hill, for a reason. A lot of Russians were migrating in there, not only just post-Tsar thing before the communists took over, but been there for a long time and helped actually build and rebuild. There's evidence of Russian soldiers helping with riots in New York back in the day too. So there's a lot of things that don't make sense in the history nowadays, and one of those things is how did we actually build those buildings and rebuild them? Yes, go ahead, Glenn.
Champ, if the people can see the architecture of this building up here right now. Notice the dome on top, and they're usually made of copper, okay, which is very conductive for electricity.
Exactly.
And at the top, you see the antenna for receiving or delivering the so-called electricity, something that Nikola Tesla was talking about. And then there's another part. You also have the pyramid, and in the middle of the pyramid, there is like the all-seeing eye or the sun. They usually use them interchangeably.
That wasn't that the new CEO of Twitter, the girl, she was wearing that on her neck the other day.
Yeah, it looked like that. Yeah, true. So
it's all the same symbols coming back over and over too.
And the beautiful architecture, all the columns, and at the top of the columns, the way they're made is supposed to symbolize intelligence. And
are the columns like were they capacitors or something like this, right? If this used like
probably conducting
some kind of electromagnetic technology, and you're right, the shapes, the architecture, the what do they call it, the when it's the same on the left and the same on the right, what do they call it? Symmetry, yeah. Symmetrical structure, and it also, like, you don't see the whole thing, but it's a semicircular building, so it looks like some kind of a fork, like
and looking at it, it looks like a lot of buildings here in Montreal, specifically old Montreal.
Exactly.
Like Montreal and Quebec are the two oldest cities in North America, right?
Yes.
So we have a lot of this architecture here, and you see the similarities. It's quite similar.
Which brings us to today, to the point of today's show. Tartaria haven't avoided, or the whole architectural thing, or mud flood theory, including the fires, haven't avoided Montreal. As a matter of fact, I watched a whole bunch of YouTube channels on that, and a lot of them are Russian YouTube channels. It seems like it's much easier to find information on Tartaria outside of the YouTube and outside of the Western world for some reason. For some reason, it's being hidden. So we are bringing to your guys' attention today. If you never heard of it, you'll probably climb down the rabbit hole and you will never climb out. The flat Earth is next after this, usually.
Well, speaking about Russia and the conflict that's going on in Ukraine, most directly the Crimean part of Ukraine, in 1944, Stalin deported 200,000 Tatars from Crimea because he accused them of siding with the Nazis during the war.
Well, that could be just an accusation just to get rid of them.
But now we also find out that in Ukraine, the left side or the west side of Ukraine seems to be more affiliated with Nazis, and the right side is more affiliated with Russia.
The Ukrainian thing, it seems like there was a lot of Nazi collaborators during World War II, and there was a big ordeal afterwards. They continue to. Again, I don't know, like, if you trust which history sources to trust. According to like a communist history sources, that the Nazis were there, or Nazi collaborators were there post World War II, and they remained there for many, many years. And they were hunted after, but then all of a sudden they stopped, and they reemerged after the Soviet Union fell apart.
So Tartaria, like, how big was it? What did it encompass? I heard it went from Afghanistan all the way to Kazakhstan, and then it went north China, Mongolia, and Siberia.
Yeah, it was
and
really
a big
big.
part of Russia too, right? I think in Russia, Champ, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have a place called Tartarstan, where there's like up to like 6.6 million
Wow.
Tartars living there.
But what you're bringing up is a good point. But I think those two things are different. I think we've been misled by Tartars of today. They do have the same name, but I don't believe it's the same civilization. I think there's something afloat there, like it's misleading intentionally. Now, that's something I can look into to go into a deeper discussion. But interesting part where you brought it up, Putin gave the governor of Tartarian Republic, or whatever it is, the map of Tartaria. So there's nothing here. We have a picture. It's right there. Putin presenting the picture to the governor.
Yeah,
Look, so there's a picture of the Tartaria on the on the table. He's done that. This is not fake news.
Yeah.
This is real. Like, and also according to Tartarian map, it's harder to see here, but there's a lot more cities that are visible on the map. Hold on, if I pull this up right here. Yeah, that's a map here. We just had it behind it. There's a lot more cities that you see in northern hemisphere, specifically above Russia, where now it's permafrost, where people no longer reside. But like places like Scandinavia seem to have a lot more civilization back in the day. One of the theories, brothers and sisters, that the temperature was a lot higher.
We had global warming back then.
Exactly.
Oh, Al Gore, you were right. I don't know how many centuries ago.
Cycles.
But something has happened, like according to because it makes absolute no sense. Why would civilization settle all the way up north, where you only have like 2-3 months of harvesting plausible? The rest of the time you got to hunt, and even that is limited because of the severe weather. And and they have such a sprawling cities and civilizations all the way up north. Like, there's a historical reference of that, including some what do they call it? Geological, discoveries. Not geological. What's the word I'm looking for? Archaeological. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, don't smoke weed. No, I don't. But back in the day in college. Okay, never mind. So the idea is there's evidence in those maps that the lands were colonized a lot more different than they are now, and the history presented to us does not correspond to that. That's why you don't really see that in the history books. Mel, let's segue right away into the. We can talk about this forever, by the way, but let's segue right away into the today's thing, which is Old Port of Montreal.
Yeah, we're gonna look at a few different buildings in the old Montreal sector. So this is where Montreal supposedly started. The building that we have here is called the Bon-Secours Market. It has been. It's a very massive building. It takes the whole block, and we'll see with the video how I find it still so massive. And this was supposedly built in just a few years. In 1844, they decided, we need something bigger for Montreal. We need to have something that shows how strong of a city we are. And this is where they had City Hall for a few years, supposedly. But if you think about it, the population of Montreal at the time in the 1840s was about 40,000 people. And it went up to about 57,000 within a decade. That's not that many people for like a city. It doesn't, to me, justify building something so massive. That they did no problem. We built it with the grey stone of Montreal. So supposedly we had quarries here in the north of the city around Mile End area. Rue des Carrières, if anybody's familiar with that, is Carrière is quarry in French. But what fascinates me with the Bon-Secours market building is that it's on so many different levels too, which to me is a sign of potential mud floods from the past. Because what I believe is that a lot of the buildings were there already and they were dug out. They would have been covered with some kind of mud, some kind of different things, and they were dug out and just refurbished, revitalized, and reopened as a brand new construction. What's really interesting also is that we haven't found any photos of the construction of this building when they were taking photos at the time, and there's a lot of photos from those dates, but none of construction. The only one where I saw some construction is obviously there were a few fires because, fires are everywhere in all the main big cities in North America. And at some point the dome burned, and that's the only photo that I've seen where they're rebuilding the dome. But apart from that, there's no proof.
So that's what the building used to look like.
Yes, exactly. So this is a nice photo of the Bon-Secours market that's probably from the late 19th century. And here we can see really the market area at the bottom. So it opened, it's called Bon-Secours Market, and there was an actual market in the front portion of the building giving on the La Commune Street. There was something like over 50 butcher stalls. There was a fish market too, and a lot of different produce was sold at the market. Which, I mean, it made sense. There was lots of markets. Down Old Montreal was the area, which was the Montreal of the time. It wasn't old at the time. It was just Montreal, right?
But you have this significant building that was used as a city hall. It was used as for the multiple. It seems like it was repurposed because, right now, you wouldn't have a market in the city hall.
No,
it makes no sense, right? For a variety of different reasons. So they build this does it make sense more that they build this building from scratch or they adopted this building for whatever needs, right? That's what it feels like. Mm-hmm. And also the water, the port itself was right up. You can't really see it in this picture, but we have other pictures to show. Look.
Yeah, this was an issue that they had every year was when the ice would melt and it would flood the whole Old Montreal section. And we can see these gentlemen here standing on top of the ice mountain that was created from the river, all the ice breaking down. Now they've later on protected the whole Montreal section by adding the seaway that kind of blocked off, and they built some docks and everything and backed up the water. It's all reclaimed land around the old port of Montreal. But that was a huge issue that they had every single year. It was flooding, and it was like, okay, well, don't you want to?
Oh, right
didn't
here.
you think
can
about
see.
that also before?
Glenn, see how close the water used to be right there?
Yeah, and I think that the railroad there is still the same one that's going through today.
Yeah, totally. So the railroad is still the same for sure. And it brings now, the port has moved more east. But this is a great shot to see how much closer the water was than it is today. So I went almost all the way to the La Commune Street. Montreal was a big port city. It still is, but now we don't see it as much because it's more in the eastern part of the city. But we can see how big the dome is and how big this building was. And again, this is built in, the 1840s, which is... It makes no sense to me that it took only a few years to build a massive building like that. And there was no real necessity to have something so big. Montreal was thriving, and they did have, so as I was mentioning, it was an administrative building. It was a city hall for almost 20 years before they supposedly build the city hall on Notre-Dame Street. And it was even the Parliament of United Canada for about a month after they burned down the St. Anne's Market, which was the Parliament of Canada at the time. So,
interesting that how long you said it took to build this?
About 4 years.
It took them, how long it took them to
Not even.
repave Saint-Denis Street?
Right. And they've undone it and redone it and undone it.
Yeah. It makes no sense. Well, it makes, Glenn, actually, this is it's an offbeat question, but I'm going to ask you that anyway. Do you think in Montreal, this is just totally off topic, in Montreal, Saint-Denis and streets like Saint-Laurent, Plateau, were intentionally demolished by long-term construction so they can regentrify places like Griffintown and Saint-Henri and all this other stuff, build all the new condos, build all the new shops and restaurants and clubs in there. Are we stepping on someone's toes? Is that something we can discuss at this show?
No, we're not stepping on anybody's toes, and if we are, well, too bad. But yes, in every city you have gentrification of an area. In other words, an upgrade, money to be spent there, increase the value of the buildings for prosperity. It's a upper echelon or a bourgeois type class of people will end up moving there. So that's normal in every city. But the problem with Montreal, you think the whole place is under construction right now because for years, a lot of this money that was supposed to be used to rebuild Montreal and keep it up to speed was being used to try and separate the whole province away from the rest of Canada. So a lot of the wealth was being diverted for another bad cause.
Let's get back to our topic. So mud flood, like if in the picture right here that you can see, and we'll actually have more in the video that we'll play for you. You can see the slant and the slope, and it doesn't make sense. There's symmetry in the building that we just talked about earlier, but there's no symmetry in foundation and like 2 levels, obviously high, and it seems like it was more dug out. And we'll give more examples of this in a second. Can you explain about the mud flood theory? So because it kind of fits in with your idea that the buildings were dug out from something, and where the mud flood could possibly come from. What do you think that was and all that?
Well, there's a few theories. I don't actually have a concrete idea, and I'm keeping myself really open on that level because there's so many different theories about how it could have happened. It could have been some kind of nuclear event as well. It could have been cataclysmic event where there was some kind of bomb or something that melted basically some of the landscape. And when you have earthquakes, liquefaction, exactly, right? So it's something that we have seen happening, but it's when you start thinking about how it could have been done on a worldwide scale, that becomes quite interesting.
Well, look at the picture here.
That's an interesting picture. Why would you have windows and doors?
Or the door.
Under?
The door. Okay, you can argue for the window, but why would you have a door underneath the level, right?
Yeah, as well, for sure. It just makes it doesn't add up. There's just so many things when you start looking into it that they don't make sense. I think this one's in New York, if I remember. But look at how, so there's a whole 3 levels under the street level. Why would you build something like that? Why was it like that, And they tried to hide, I think, those things really quickly when they find some things like that all over the world when they're doing new constructions and things like that, and then they discover, hold on, we had these tunnels here.
This clearly was not a basement foundation, because if it was in this picture, it was a basement or foundation, why would you put all this intricate of architecture with all the columns and arches?
Exactly.
It would be
why would you go through the trouble for something that would be buried, So one of the theories that a lot of the buildings, we only see the top part of them, that there's actually more levels underground. And that's been shown all over the world. There's more and more underground cities that are discovered, and buildings that suddenly we discover that there's a trap and you could go down, and there's a tunnel and it's connecting to something else. We keep hearing about new discoveries all over the world too, and it's fascinating. There's a lot of different people that are talking about this subject worldwide, which I find is it's a very interesting movement, because it's also a lot of people just walking around in their hometown and looking at buildings and being like, oh, this is kind of odd. Why is this like that? And just questioning the narrative. And that's what I find is really interesting about the whole Tartaria old world movements, is that it's real people just going around and taking videos, taking photos of their surroundings, finding old photos.
Oh, look at this photo. Like you
Yeah,
can,
they're digging here, right? Like you see, that's what they're doing.
it looks just a lot of dirt. I mean, you can see a lot of construction on the back, and it's just doesn't make sense because it looks like a modern architecture, doesn't it?
But they look old already, the building also, right? So it's like
At the same time, and actually, well, it's black and white picture, but they look darkened, so like a fire burn of some sort.
yeah. Definitely.
It's strange. You have this architectural buildings built, a couple of 100 years ago, and they're still solid today, like
100%.
new, just like when they built them. Yet today, even with the new technologies that we have, we can't even build the bridge that lasts 60, 70 years before they have to make a new bridge.
Sure. Yeah.
And you
it's,
have you have duplexes that fall apart. What 10, 20 years into it? After
yeah,
you built them?
all the new construction is so like
Bland.
it's bland, and it's like they've cut a lot of corners. Like all these new condos that we have in Old Montreal, there's suddenly there's leakage. Like there's a whole bunch of problems because they're cheap. They're built cheap, and they're not built to last. Like it's pretty crazy. Here again, we see, and this would be in Milan, how there's a lot of stuff going out under. So. It's very fascinating. There's a lot of questions, and the more I've been looking into that, the more questions I've had, and that's one of the reasons why it's a subject that I'm so passionate about, because I love the idea of not knowing in a way, and of questioning and of discovering like different aspects. And it's just fascinating. And this goes not just for buildings, but for the railroad system as well. The railroad system. And I don't remember which where it was, but they were saying how they got thousands and thousands of shovels. Why did they need shovel? Maybe it was the system there already, and they just had to dig it out.
Oh, so specifically, I think that referred to like London Metro and Moscow Metro. Moscow Metro was built like during sometime between a revolution and World War II. In which economy? With what? With the shovels?
How
they built
did you- yeah.
they built one of the deepest, the most intricate systems in Moscow. Like with what technology?
Exactly.
It seems there's a lot more evidence, and that's a whole different show. The subway systems all over the world.
The Roman city that's like always underwater. What's it
Venice.
called?
Venice.
Venice
Yeah.
in Italy. Sorry. Yeah, that like. Why would you build it under the water for? It's like it was already built, and now the water
Suddenly
is
there's
coming
water,
in.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't add up, and that's the thing that's interesting is when you put next to each other the history that we've been told of, like Montreal had this amount of people at the time, and then you look at the history of some of the buildings and the architect, and there's a lot of loopholes. There's a lot of things missing. As I was saying, no photos of constructions. Like there's barely any photos of those old buildings being built in Montreal, and I own a lot of books about Montreal.
Okay, look at this picture.
Yeah, look at that. Like there's a whole other level under, this
the
would be
capital.
in Washington. And very similar architecture to the Bon-Secours market. Like, okay,
That's
now
Washington D.C.,
Yeah,
right?
it's
And they
Washington.
say that's all full of Freemasonry symbols.
Oh yeah, it's mega Freemasonry. Well, one thing that's interesting that you're talking about the Masons. Well, before, supposedly the history goes that before the Bon-Secours market was built, it was a land that belonged at some point to John Molson, and he had a hotel built on it. And the second hotel, because of course there was some kind of destruction, some kind of fire, the second hotel was called the Masonic Hall. So just, there's always little hints in a lot of places where like, it's like the way I see it is like someone had really a lot of fun writing our history. Because when you start looking into it, it's hilarious. It makes no sense. Like it's
Look
just
at-
absurd. Like
Look at this picture.
like
do you
how
ex-
that's
how do you
like
explain
way
that?
deeper.
How do you explain that?
Yeah.
And-
And they find explanations for everything, right? They were like, oh, well, this was done, but we don't really know what happened. And
So how old is the original Tartaria, like the maps we were looking at? That's how long ago are they guesstimating?
that's a tricky thing too, because, like Alex was mentioning earlier, like, I do believe that everything, the history that we're told, like the Romans and everything, like the Greeks, I think that was way more recent. A lot of those events were way more recent than what we've been told. Like that, yeah, there was like 1,000 years.
Oh, this
added.
one's 1771. Look.
So 1771. But then the thing that it's so easy to erase information in the world that we live in, you know, like especially now with like the internet, like there's a lot of information on the internet, but you don't know if it's real at all. It's almost impossible to know what's real anymore, you know? So I go with, you know, my personal instinct, and like there's certain things that feel really wrong and certain that feel right, and I try to find my way through all of that.
Speaking of MudFlood, look at this old picture. It's all out of focus. So, again,
It's also
we don't know
crooked
reference.
too.
Yeah, it's all crooked. But look at the amount of mud next to it.
Yeah.
You know, when people talk about the greatest so-called military leaders the world has ever saw in the history of humanity, you know, they'll talk about Alexander the Great or Napoleon, you know, or Hitler.
Yeah.
But very few people know that the greatest military leader of all time was a person named Genghis Khan.
True.
And he ran the Mongolian Empire right through Persia and everything from, well, he was born in 1202 until 1227. And
short life.
yeah, and they also said that he was a part of the expansion of Tartaria.
All right, Glenn, you're full of knowledge today. Well, you are always full of knowledge.
Apparently.
Yeah.
I
And
wasn't
that's the
there.
Thing. We don't know, you know, that's the thing. It's hard to figure out exactly a timeline because there's like, you know, there's different theories. From what I can see, I think that everything that's been told to us, like that it was kind of reset around somewhere between 1850 and the early 1900s. And there's a lot of weird, like, sketchy little things, like through the World Fairs, which is something we'll talk about another time. But like orphan trains and like baby incubators and a lot of stuff that just, you're like, what happened to the parents? Why was there so many orphans? Like, why were there so many massive orphanage? Like, there's a lot of different questions that really has a lot of different facets.
What are we looking at here?
There we have a really nice view on the front of the Bon-Secours market with its really big dome, which is like the third or fourth dome that's been put on there. But same as the building we were looking earlier that you were talking about.
Capitol building.
Not the Capitol building. The first one we were looking with the columns, right?
Kazan,
So the dome
cathedral.
with the antenna, free energy was a real thing. Like people didn't have to worry about electricity. Like you had free energy. Everybody had free energy. That's the thing that I mean when I'm saying that everything was more like beautiful. Life was easier back then. Life was made for you to enjoy living, right? So you didn't have to pay so much money to be a human on this planet. Like everything was provided. Also, they really wanted you to be in good shape, and they knew the importance of oscillations and vibration. And they had, for example, all the buildings that we call now churches and things like that. Well, originally they weren't churches. I think religion is a concept that was invented to fit the narrative and to
Yeah, I would say that too, because all the churches in Montreal, they look very familiar, and they said, well, the Roman Catholic Church had outsourced the building of the churches to the Freemason. So that's what we're told.
There's a lot of pictures and evidence, and it's something that I don't have it here, but we can do a show on that, where the original cathedrals that are still used now did not have the crosses on them. The crosses were put much later.
Yeah, and so were the stained glass.
The stained glasses, yeah. But each cathedral has a unique architectural design in terms of it creates a different vibration depending on that cathedral. So you would go in it for whatever healing purposes.
And the biggest one in Montreal, or must be within, I don't know how far, is the St. Joseph's Oratory. That is huge.
It's a massive structure.
And we'll do a whole different show on that, but let's continue looking at what we're looking here. Like here, you can see the slope, right?
Yeah, you can see the slope, and you can see how it looks like, you know, there was maybe another window or another door. Like it looks like there's some new stone that were put there below the window. I just want to go back to
look at the massive doors. Look at that.
Yes, the doors are so big, and this is a thing that, you know, is so interesting too. It's like, why would you build such a massive door. Like no one needs such a
Well-
big door, but they say, oh well, because it represents a grandeur and everything.
Or they
but-
had to travel with the horse inside. Remember, that was one of the excuses.
No,
That's
they knew that
sometimes-
Alex wanted to go
right,
there one
exactly.
day.
But
you
even
know?
for Alex, it was a massive door.
Yeah, this door is way too big.
Way too big. But there's some examples where you
Especially
see even
like
bigger
if you live in
doors.
the north, right? Why would you have such a big door? Because you lit it out, you open the door during the wintertime, you let out all the heat instantly. Makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
You can also see that a lot of it looks like they were window openings that are going
Right, under
below the
the-
ground.
exactly. You
Below
can
the
see it really
existing
well on this
windows,
one.
of though, as though there was another floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
That's like
several floors.
exactly that's hidden. And this building, so like it's very symmetrical, like on both sides.
But why is there no symmetry here, right?
Well, that's it. Why is there no symmetry with like the front of the building, with the back of the building as well? Like, and they say, oh well, there was a little tiny hill, so they built it like that. So there's 2 more floors in the front than there is in the back. But to me, that makes no sense on an architecture side of things. I'm not an architect. I don't know, but I have questions. It just makes no sense. Like again, we see almost like the beginning of Windows down there, and now they have like so traps for the air and things like that. But there's a lot of things that have been covered up, and when you start looking at this, and it's a subject that's really it's such a big subject, and you may hear us talk about it, and you're like, well, yeah, you're crazy, and you're just looking for stuff everywhere. But once you start looking into it, and when you start seeing it on a daily basis in your surroundings, it becomes very interesting. And once you know, then you start questioning everything. So look at that. That's another massive door on the side here, and it's there's so many things that when you look at it, you're like, okay, well, why would you make your life so much more complicated to build things this way when you could have done it like a way different way? That's like, that's when we were
This could
close
be
up
like
to the door.
It could be that.
And it could have been
the door
original
handle.
door handles potentially. But yeah, those doors are huge and they're like, heavy to push. There's some other buildings where we have big doors where they put kind of windows. This was the perfect timing with our friend opening the doors as we were filming.
Melanie has a way of disproving conspiracy theorists, right? I mean, you just start asking more questions, logical questions, and you can see things that don't make sense logically. And you just said it. Well, why would they build it like that? What would be the purpose?
Yeah.
There's something that we don't know, and that's like we don't have to have an answer, right? We could admit we don't know.
That's it. Exactly. And I think, I think that's what's important. People now, they just really want to know like the whole truth, and this is how it's supposed to be. But I think what's more important is to question everything and to look at your life and look at it. Well, also there we can see how big the door is.
That's a smaller door.
And that's the smaller
That's the
door.
smallest door in
Yeah.
the building.
Yeah.
I'm 7 feet tall.
So, and that's it. That's the smallest one. This is on the south side of the building, on the La Commune side. And this is where we had, like, when we looked earlier at the market photos, this is where it would have been. The market was on that side of the building, basically, for quite a few years. But that's the thing. And there's another theory that we live in a simulation. And so that everything was really created to keep us captive in the simulation. And one of the proof, supposedly, that we are in a simulation is when you look at the past, there's a lot of loopholes and there's a lot of things because when they were
Like overlaps.
overlaps. And when they would have created this whole simulation, they focused really like more on the present time and on the future, but not so much about the details of the past. So when you start digging up in the past and you start looking at more specific things, you suddenly realize that there's a lot of things that don't add up and doesn't fit the narrative that we've been told.
Even with the pyramids, even with today's technology
Yeah.
and superior building techniques, so they say, it doesn't look so superior anymore. But they say that it would be very, very difficult to replicate the pyramids.
Yeah.
Yet when we talk about pyramids, 99% of the people just think about Egypt.
Yeah.
Yet
Which-
apparently there are pyramids all over the world, and some are much bigger than the ones in Egypt. We have them over in Mexico.
Yep.
From the ex-Mayan
Yes,
Empire and the
Renaissance.
Aztecs. You have them all over South America.
And I think there's a lot more pyramids than we've been told. Like a lot of those some of those pyramids, we can see photos of them before they realized it was a pyramid, and they're completely covered with grass, and it just looks like a little mountain, right? But there's an actual pyramid under it. So it's like, how many more of those pyramids do we actually have worldwide that we don't even know are pyramids?
Yeah, like in this picture here, it looks like a pyramid that's just being dug out from what you were talking about, the mud floods, or
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
the covering up of it.
Yeah, so there's a lot. There's
Peru,
when you start
the
looking
Incas in
everywhere.
Peru.
Yeah. India, there's a lot of different styles as well, and some of them, like, they look so similar, but they're like across the world, you know. Even here, if you look the Mayan versus the Balinese, very similar traits. Like, they're both kind of dragon looking. Like, it shows how I think that's it. There was like whole civilizations before that were worldwide, and I don't think it's only the Tartarians. I think there's a lot of different civilizations that have lived, and there's been resets and resets and resets over and over in on the planet that we're on, and that's why we discover things from different civilizations that's still being used today, that's been transformed and taken from the past, and we're being told the story about, okay, Egyptians, that's how they build stuff, and this, but when you start looking into it concretely with like dates and how the history, what it's supposed to be, it's weird. And you see it still keeps going like further down, that's like through the ground.
You're talking about the reset. I'm one who believes that we're in for a reset. It's time, because it really is time to thin the herd. You know, like a lot of humanity has lost their marbles. So
yeah, the society's been made for us to lose our marbles, right? Like, if we're not strong enough mentally or on different levels. And I think that's the whole purpose, is to keep us dumb, like to dumb down everybody so that we don't start questioning things like that. We don't start questioning what's wrong and what's like, what doesn't add up in our past. Because if we all start doing that, well, the world as we know it is over in a second. Like, it's going to be crumbling. It's already crumbling. I think we've already won the war against parasites and evil that are in charge. And we're just fighting the last little battles, you know, but there's still a lot to do.
that's very, very good. I would have to agree. I think the bad global elites now have been taken down.
Yeah.
And we
And they're
have
struggling.
an arise. Yeah, they're still fighting back because they have a lot of wealth and everything. We're seeing it. And indications are out there, and they've been going on for a while, that there's a new global elites, more like the good, they call them patriots or stuff like that, that are taking over the control. So there's going to be a lot of changes coming our way. But before we get from now to that little like utopia,
It's going to be chaos.
we're going to go through a little bit of hell. Modern day hell.
Yeah.
Well, let's continue watching this video. I
sure.
like this video a lot.
Yeah,
'cause
it's such a stunning building. And then next to it, we have the Notre-Dame-de-Bon-Secours chapel, with Mary all the way on top welcoming the sailors. This was known as the Sailors' Chapel because it's right next to the water, and this is where people would go and pray before they went on a long journey, or where they would pray when they would come back to say thank you for me not dying on my water journey.
I believe we have pictures from inside.
Yeah, we'll have some after, and there's like cute little boats, boat lights. But that church is also, it's one of the oldest church in Montreal, but it's the third one.
Is it from the church?
Yeah, this is from all the way on top next to the Virgin Mary, because you can climb all the way. There's a really nice lookout spot. It's quite a good climb, lots of steps. This is one of the statues that we have all the way on top, so we can see the La Commune Street and big cruise ships also in the background. So this is also from the inside when you go all the way.
I would like to ask you, since you know about so much about the architecture, what's the ideology about these old massive buildings, beautiful architecture with the gargoyles? What are they just been put there, or are they from the old times?
I think they're from old civilization. I think there was a lot of different animals that existed that they call dinosaurs or things like that, but they weren't dinosaurs. They were like part of the fauna that we had, I think there's a lot of erased.
Well, like you have the what do they call the Chinese astrological signs they have of every animal, but then they also have a dragon.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you have the rocks that they find in South America. What country is that? Is it Peru or Bolivia? Or is it maybe a little bit higher up north, where they have the rocks with all the dinosaurs etched on them?
The Toltec? No, maybe not. I don't know. Sure.
I'm actually curious to pull this up.
No, the
But
Toltec.
I think they're part of old civilization. Like, and I mean those. And I found a lot, like, since I started looking more at, like, I mean, it's really interesting because I always was interested in architecture. I always thought, like, oh, it's pretty. But then when I started looking into Tartaria and all of that, I was like, oh, wow, this is a whole other level that's, like, fascinating to me. And then I started seeing, like, yeah, a whole bunch of gargoyles, like, in Montreal and some of the buildings. One thing that really got me at the beginning of all this was when I discovered that there was massive aqueducts in the States. I think it's called the Croton Aqueduct, and it goes into New York City. But they look like the aqueducts that you have in south of France and that you have in like all over Europe. And to me, that made no sense that we had some of those based on when those are supposed to be built, like, and that we have them here in North America. So it's just fascinating when you start like looking into certain aspects of like, there's so many lies. History is so fake, and it's just fascinating. Dinosaurs, I don't think dinosaurs ever existed. I think most of them are giants' bones that have been like, this is how they're saying
Here, but I found some
they
rocks.
created a whole
Look,
thing, right?
This is what I was referring to.
Well, if dinosaurs were supposed to be around for something like 6 million years, every time you dig into the ground
You
to
should
put a
find
new building,
something.
you should find something. I mean, 6 million years, it's got to
Yeah.
have bones. It's everywhere.
And there's no complete skeleton of any of the dinosaurs that they claim exist. Zero.
You were talking about the Toltecs. I read a book about that. The Toltecs. They were the high priests who were part of the Incas, the Mayans. You know, all the top. They all got together and created their own ideology or philosophy, the Toltecs. And I read a book about that. The 4 points of the Toltec was: always do your best, always tell the truth, be impeccable with your word. In other words, how you deliver the message is just as important as the message itself.
100%.
And do not take anything personally. So when you start applying your life to those ideologies, you see how it all fits together and makes life a little bit easier at the
Yeah,
individual
right.
level. You know, if
Exactly.
everybody did that, maybe we'd be able to get along and we wouldn't care about our color or nationality.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. There's just
Yeah, and I think we are taught to feel resentment in divisive approach of our
Yeah.
civilization right
so
now.
much hatred.
So much divide and conquer thing, and that's how we hold on to the resentment, and resentment that eats you alive.
Yeah.
Resentment is the cancer. Cancer is the resentment.
And it keeps you in a low vibration also, right? So everything is just like negative, and you're just like swimming in this whole like negative crap. And then you're watching the news, and like you're living in Quebec or wherever in the world, and it's like madness everywhere. And you're supposed to feel like normal and everything's okay. And why aren't I feeling good? And like, it's just made to mess you up, like the whole system that we're in. And I think that's like going back to like on the other show talking about like trans movement and things like that. I think it's a way that people have to, instead of doing the inner work and going inside and starting to love themselves as they are, they find this escape going through like, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm not supposed to be a man. I'm actually a woman. Or maybe I'm not a woman. I'm actually a man.
Yeah,
And
it
this is the
doesn't work.
solution. But that's not exactly.
because the suicide rates are exponentially
Exactly. It
higher.
doesn't, that's not the solution. You have to go back to really like your core self. And,
But what you just said is it's creating disease, okay, amongst the population, a body in dis-ease. It's not
Exactly.
feeling comfortable. It's not vibrating at a productive or natural frequency.
I have something to add to this. The family is being destroyed intentionally, and is the family is
100%.
being destroyed intentionally, it's when we have a lot of those abandonment and narcissistic issues, and we're talking about when people are confused about self-love and being loved.
Yeah.
And let's not focus on being loved, because nobody's going to love you as much as you're going to love yourself. No matter who it is, your parent, your partner, the society, nobody's going to love you that much as you love yourself, which is, well, and God loves you unconditionally. And that's the love you can feel. The thing is, like, the contrast of that is when you express that love, the only way you can express that love for others is when you love yourself. And the thing is, we always so focused, like, oh, who's going to love me? Like, no, who are you going to love? And can you love? And what is it love? How can you love others? Like, when I pray and I have my affirmations, I affirm that I have all those people around me that I love. And that is my form of service. And that's my form of giving that love. But the only way I can give that love if I love myself.
Yeah.
But self-love starts first, and self-love is still from something greater. And family is a big part of that. We always live in this contrast that we experience north-south, day, night, man, women. But those contrasts always blend in. We don't talk about black and white. We talk about gray. We talk about trans. Because you can choose to be whichever one. Observe both parts of you and accept both parts of you.
Chap, I just want to add one thing that I think is very, very important to that is out of control egos are being exposed today. The three faces. It's called me, myself, and I. This is the grassroots of the narcissistic society that we have in here. People just focus on themselves. They think they're the center of the universe. And that's what leads to sociopaths and psychopaths. Now, I think we'll get on to the next thing. This picture here.
There's a bigger door.
You're like 7 feet and change now because you're standing there with shoes on and you're not even like
quarter way, 1/3 maybe.
One
Maybe
third.
1/3
Yeah, that's
max.
got to be a 21-foot door there.
And why, and there's no horses
There's no horses coming up those
There's
steps.
no horses going up those steps. So, that's a whole other...
But even then, you wouldn't need a door that high for even horses.
No, you wouldn't.
Clydesdales, you
No,
don't need that.
You never would. No, so that's it. Like, that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of architecture details that I question. And we like those. There was some holes in the steps. But yeah, there's just so much that doesn't add up, so much that doesn't make sense to me based on what we're supposed to know about these buildings, what we're supposed to know about the history, the way that they build stuff. And if you think about, even we didn't talk about cathedrals in Europe, but again, those buildings were built pretty quickly. But here, there's no way that this building was built in 4 or 5 years. How is that even possible? I don't even think they could do that today, if they wanted, with the technology that we have today, And this building is still standing and it's still super strong. It's been damaged by a few fires, but it's still, it's not moving. It's not going anywhere.
What does it say here?
What burns in this fire?
Right.
What's burning in there? It's all
Yeah,
cement.
only
and
the cupola, the dome burned. So this is John Johnson, and so the Mansion House is the one that those are the luxury hotels that were there before the Bon-Secours market. And so it's interesting because Mansion Hotel was the one of John Johnson, and then it was sold to John Molson. There was a Royal Theatre that was there, and then the British American Hotel. But the British American Hotel is the one that became the Masonic Hall, or vice versa. Masonic Hall became British American Hotel when it belonged to John Molson, which I wouldn't be surprised if he was a Freemason. But so this is a little old plate telling us what used to be there in 1698. So the Baron de Longueuil had his manor over here and lived there, and then Sir John Johnson, and then afterwards so this is, to me, just a way to try to create the history also, and being like, oh, well, this happened, and then this other level. But we have no images of any of those other buildings, or barely any. Some are more like sketches.
So across the street, this is the church.
That's the church across the street. Then see how we see, it looks like there used to be a window there that was completely blocked off by the stone. So there's a lot of things that have been changed over the years. This chapel, is supposedly the third one in this location, but this is where they had a first wooden chapel originally at the beginnings of Ville-Marie, which was the old name for.
And so
for
the video that you
Montreal.
have is this it?
Yes, this is in the crypt. So this is the second church, and they build the third one on top of the remnants of the second church here. So you can visit the crypt of Notre-Dame-de-Bon-Secours. And so obviously it's in the basement, right? And you keep going down, and there's another level down, and there's this other room that I wasn't allowed to go into, but that looked really intriguing. But look at like those stones, and like it's interesting to see this whole other section that's underground, and they have no shame about it, saying that they built it on top of this one. But this original church was also lower than the new one, so they build on top and on top, and lots of different type of stones. And there's some theories that some of the stones are melted bricks as well. So there's a lot of different theories out there on what this. Yeah, they brought a staircase from France, because why don't you bring? Why not, right? Why would you not bring a staircase all the way from France? It makes sense. There's also another staircase like that I saw recently at the Musée des Hospitalières on Des Pins, where you have a whole staircase that comes from France too. Here we see the front of the chapel.
And this is the inside.
And this is the inside, exactly. And the inside was changed. I think it was in
you have the boats hanging off the ceiling, right?
Yeah, you have the boat lights. So this is not the original inside. I think they probably removed a lot of more beautiful stuff, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like today. And there's this whole story also with like an old statue made in wood that came with the first trips in the like 1650s, 1660s. And that little wooden statue survived all the fires, So there's always some random stories.
You were speaking about France. What are the two most well-known architectural buildings in France? One would be the Eiffel Tower, and the other one would be Notre-Dame
Basilica, yeah.
That burnt down. See how you're
sacrifice.
Saying? Yeah, you're saying a lot of these big churches, whatever you want to call them. Maybe today they're churches, but they always seem to try and burn them down.
Yeah.
By the way, a little bit of a history here. I have a great grandfather who's one of the Freemasons who has, I think he's second or third name on the building and the architectural of the Eiffel Tower.
Interesting.
Oh, Glenn, there's way more questions now we have for you.
See, there's hope for the G-Man.
There's so much.
So keep your friends closer, right? So what are we looking at here? That's the church from the different angle.
Exactly. That's the other side of the church on the La Commune. And there's some additions, like this whole section at the bottom part was added later on. And when you're in the crypt, you come out at the door that's next to the truck, but you can see the windows are also lower. It feels like there's, more levels underground. And one of the things that I've noticed is often with some buildings, they'll have at the bottom part, you see how the bottom part is the gray stone. They'll use the gray stone to hide bricks or to hide different things. A lot of the buildings were actually built in bricks, and they kind of have the gray stone just in front to cover it to look different. So that's another part that I'm wondering how much that's made to cover up some stuff that wouldn't really make sense if we were to look at it on the architecture side of things. But yeah, if you look here at the back of the building, like there's just so many different levels. It's just a weird way to build something to me. And of course, you can tell me, well, there's a hill, it makes sense, but why wouldn't you make it easier?
Why would you dig out the whole thing?
Why would you exactly, like, if you're gonna do something like this big, why don't you flatten it out a bit? Which is what they do nowadays. Like they make things even before building on top instead of like adjusting necessarily themselves.
And clearly there were better builders back in the day because all those structures are still standing. So obviously it's not like they were uneducated.
No, exactly. They knew what they were doing.
They knew what they were doing. So why wouldn't they level it,
Just the foundation, the weight under all this brickage here is just the foundation, because there's not a lot of steel used in here. It's just brick and mortar.
Yeah.
So the foundation itself has to be so incredibly strong.
Yeah. And deeper also, like underground to keep the weight of all this building. So
Exactly. Instead of digging it out, they decided to put another stone retainer stone wall, retention stone wall. Some of the things don't, but this is kind of segues back into the mud flood, right? So in fires, tell the history of the fires of Montreal.
Lots of fires also in Montreal. There was a big one in 1852, if I remember properly, that to destroy a big part of the city, and that was supposedly started by like a woman and like I think it was a horse or a cow that kicked out like something and it burned. It started burning.
When
There's
was the
always,
great?
like, really
When was the
weird
Great Chicago
stories.
Fire?
Around the 1850s,
Chicago
there was a
fire.
lot of Chicago fires, and well, not Chicago fires, but I mean, there's a lot of fires. You'll find fires all through the big cities, all around. New York had
New
big
York,
fires.
Quebec
San
City,
Francisco, Quebec City had big fires. Boston, like, and I think those fires were meant to destroy some of those old buildings that was starting to not fit the narrative, right? And same thing, that's what I also believe World War II was all about in Europe, to destroy a lot of the old structures, whether it was in Germany, in London, like in France, like all over the place. If you look at the photos before and after, like it's all those stunning buildings that
Same
were
thing in Russia.
flattened. Same thing in Russia, right? So I think that's the point, is to destroy a lot of the events that we have, that we hear about in history, were made to destroy those old remnants of this past that doesn't really add up when you start looking into it a bit more.
Let's look at this street. Look at this street. Like this street makes
This
no
is St.
sense.
Paul, yeah. And St. Paul Street is the oldest street in Montreal. So it's one of them that's like super crooked. It's not like a straight line like all of them, because they kept the original.
And again, there's a slope.
Yeah, there's another slope, and this is some older buildings also that are probably from the 1850s.
But the thing is, like, it's already on the slope. It's
Yeah.
already on the slope. So, and they're already building something. So what we're going to show here is the fact that they went still another level below.
That's it. Like,
So why wouldn't they dig out even more so? Because if they had to go through all this trouble, and yeah, unfortunately, Montreal is known, like, it's not as bad as San Francisco, Los Angeles.
It's getting there. A lot of homeless people.
yeah,
Yeah.
Vancouver is really intense.
Yeah, but Canada has money to send to Ukraine, but we have a lot of homeless people in
course.
Canada right
And it will
now.
just make it legal for them to have drugs on them and walk around, and no worries.
Because it helps.
So this is right across from the Notre-Dame, the Bon-Secours market. And yeah, very interesting structures where, like, yeah, they all have like a basement features, and it goes way down. And then in the front also, like, the door, instead of being right on the street level, there's like always going to be steps, and there's like some that are higher and some that are lower. It's all a bit weird to me, to be honest. This
So
is the back of the building.
Yeah, here we were able to sneak in the back.
Yeah.
Sneak in the back and look. Same thing in the back of the building. Look, you can see the
Yeah.
window. See the window.
Yeah, there's a window here on the right-hand side that's
Yeah.
been covered up.
Covered up, and it's such a weird window. Like, why would you build a window
Right
halfway
into-
through the
yeah,
steps,
it makes no
halfway through the
sense.
steps, and then build the door even deeper into this?
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting when you start, like, when I check out buildings like that, to document them,
Yeah,
I always go all around the
and
building.
it's not just a brickage; you can see the frame.
Yeah.
And why would the
Yeah.
frame be covered by the steps on top of that? This makes no sense. It seems like it was dug out. They dug out as much as they can, and then they just build the steps because that was just the easy way out.
Yeah.
And then they build that retention wall around the steps so more dirt doesn't collapse in it. And then they covered the windows, so because it makes no sense to have a window on the steps like this.
Right.
That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, so it's just fascinating when you start looking into it. There's just so much everywhere. Little, like, pockets of survival of something way older that we need to check out a bit more.
To go even older, because there seems to be a connection between what I'm going to talk about. The oldest known scriptures or writing in humanity so far that's been found is from the ancient Sumerians, 3400 BC. And there's supposed to be a correlation between the Sumerians and the Tartarians from Tartura.
What's the correlation?
It's like you were talking about advanced societies.
Hmm.
Well, they didn't start off as advanced. So they start off and then they advance. So it's one that rolls into the other. We seem to be now on the
Downhill.
downhill
Yeah.
and speeding up.
Yeah, it feels like they're trying to see, okay, how much can we control people in a way? And like, it feels to me like a whole, like, such a, like, an experience, like, that we're, like, experiments that, and that's one thing I was thinking about, like, how, like, when I was in New Zealand and in Mexico, just how it's the same, I think it's the same crappy people controlling the whole world, but it's as if they're trying different things from one country to the other or from one region to the other. So it's like, for example, in Quebec, okay, we'll force like religion super intensely on people, right? And then we'll be like super religious and we'll see what happens with that. And then over there in this country, we'll try to force like, a whole other thing like agriculture or some different things and some different like issues, some different social problems. And it's as if they're testing to see, okay, how are people going to react? Like what's going to happen? So it's just a weird thing happening everywhere worldwide when you look at it a bit more.
Yeah, look at this intricate
this
structure.
whole basement, like, yeah.
And again, it's below ground. And
stones.
it seems like it was. I mean, it feels like it was dug out versus built that way.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we can't really prove it.
Yeah.
But because, okay, it makes sense. Let's say if the Bon-Secours right here, right here, the building across the street, the other side of it was the river. Right now it's reclaimed land, but before that it was the river. So it makes sense. Maybe that's why it was slopey on that end, and it makes sense why there are two different levels on one side versus the other. But why would you have a building where you would like dig out? Like, well, more real estate and all that stuff. That would make sense, but wouldn't it be cheaper to build it higher versus digging these things out? Because you use the same amount of construction material to build the floor underground. On top of that, you have to somehow protect it from the water runoff, and also you have to spend energy on digging it out versus just building it upwards if it's already on the slope.
Yeah.
Like clean it enough to go higher versus dig out first, dig in. I'm not an engineer. If there are any engineers, I don't know, Glenn, you seem to be a Freemason. You tell me what's the story behind it.
But another thing with that is like, it's not like they didn't know that the water would rise every year.
Like right here. That's what you're referring to. So two different levels. You can see there's steps leading to this door. Why is this door not on the door on the floor level, like the gate next to it? And then there's steps going below, and then you have like a miniature door. So why isn't there a floor level? Like there's two disconnect. Like there seems like it still seems like it's a part of the dig.
Yeah.
I'd like to help you, big guy, but the G-man, he just builds gyms.
Okay, right here, is that what you're referring to? Like the gray stone and the brick?
Yeah, here, for example, at the bottom you have the gray stone with the brick on top. On the other side, you have like a whole bunch of stones, but, they look also darkened, like maybe there could have been a fire over there. There's just a lot of things that don't add up. And again, I'm not either an engineer or an architect, and, there might be answers for everything that I'm saying. But to me, I'm still gonna keep questioning. Like, there's still a lot of things that, like the Bon-Secours market. Like, that the water is gonna go up every year. It's not like it's a surprise. It was already something that they knew. So why would you build such an impressive, massive building that's gonna be the pride of the city and everything, right next to a spot that is gonna get flooded regularly every year? That to me is also a bit of a weird choice of space.
What about this structure? It's like, look at it. Is that a new brick? Because the red brick has a special place in this whole Tartaria thing, isn't it?
Exactly, because when we're talking about free electricity and free energy, well, the brick is a huge conductor of electricity, and that's why a lot of the buildings were built in brick, because the energy could travel through the bricks as well. On top of the copper is also.
So what's up with the gray stone here?
Well, exactly. Here it's like, what is going on? You have the bricks, you have newer bricks, older bricks, you have the gray stone on the other side. It's just feels like a whole like mashup of like, okay, let's try to cover this part and do this differently for this side. Maybe there's more bricks behind those stones. And yeah, those staircases were just the way this was built is very weird to me. Like this whole basement happening, but with a big curve and like right into the rock, basically. So just a weird way to build things to me.
Obviously there was an advanced society, let's face it. I mean, this would be very difficult to make today. Exactly. And very expensive. Yeah. Okay. So apparently in 1961, they found in Romania the Tartaria, like the tablets, like the guide stones or the 10 Commandments, something like that. And they're just trying to prove it or disprove it right now. So they're starting to create a picture, you start connecting the dots and you start formulating something in your mind and you're saying, wow, look, logically it looks like there was an advanced civilization. Okay.
Yeah, more and more. And I think that's the thing, is everything is kind of coming up now because a lot more people are interested in those subjects and they're literally digging into history. And it's becoming, quite a phenomenon. And like more and more people are talking about it, and from all over the world. That's what's really fascinating. If you go on Instagram and you type Tartaria, you'll start getting Tartaria Scotland, Tartaria. Like I started when Montreal and New Zealand. There's a few people in Australia doing a lot of really interesting work. There's already people in New Zealand also. And so I started this page at Tartaria Montreal one back in March 2021. So it's been about 2 years. And it's grown like a lot since then. Here we have images from New Zealand also. Those are.
I lived like literally 5 minutes
right
from this museum.
Yeah. That's in a park that they call the Auckland Domain. And this is the War Memorial Museum with a huge memorial in front.
Natural History Museum in there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. There's also the History Museum in there. And I'd have to look into, I don't remember the dates of this one, but again, it was supposedly built really quickly. And so the narrative in Canada, like in Montreal, for example, they say that, people here, we have some Vancouver shots. Vancouver is also a very interesting city for their old buildings. But like Montreal supposedly was started in 1642. But if you think about New Zealand, I think the first people supposedly arrived in the early 1800s. Well, the Maoris were there already, but the English would have arrived around that time. And then by 1850, 1880, they have like massive structures that are already built over there, which is like, hold on, you're telling me you just showed up here with like a few people, and you're already building massive structures like this, like 30 years after arriving to the land? Yeah, that's in New Zealand. That's in Wellington. So this building built in 2 years, from 1918 to 1920. Of course, it's
Melanie, do you know a gentleman named David Icke?
Yes.
He's probably very big in this too, right?
Yeah, he's talked about a lot of different things. I don't know how much of the whole like Tartaria subject he's touched on. There's a lot of different people talking about it worldwide. But David Icke definitely had some very interesting ideas on our past and how things are, and also linked to like parasites being in charge of the world.
Have you written any books?
Not yet.
Not yet. That was my next question. Okay, then when? Coming up soon?
One day for sure. There's definitely a lot to talk about. That could be fun. Yeah, a book. I'll be down. Until then, I'll keep researching and learning more and unlearning a lot of things too. That's, I think, what's key is to open your mind. To open your mind to the fact that what you've learned your whole life is a bunch of lies, and it's a scary thing to think about, and it can be very traumatizing in the sense that you lose all your reference points. But I think that's the most important part of life in a way, is to like realize that things are not what they seem.
It's amazing, eh, big guy? Today, what you have to educate yourself at the same time as to unindoctrinate yourself. So you have to work it at both ends.
Yeah.
Look at this. Like this is we can see so many different inconsistencies in this
going on.
picture. If you look at the window frames, they're a lot bigger than the windows themselves. You have a wooden plank holding up the enormous stone structure above a couple of floors. You have dugout basements in the rock curving out like there's things, and you have the red rock followed by the gray stone facade, not rock, the great bricks with a facade. Like some of that stuff absolutely makes no sense. It seems like it's been built, rebuilt, reconstructed, dug out, restructured, and none of that actually makes into the main history explanation. Because I don't know, like you do guided history tours.
Yeah, I am a.
How does
Montreal
that? How is
tour
that?
guide.
What's the official explanation for this?
Oh, there's a lot of different explanations, but I don't think they necessarily went through every single building to figure out how they were built. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different explanations in the narrative on how things were built and why they were built this way, and the ground might have been like lower before, and then when they built the new streets, well, they made it higher, and there's a lot of like different explanations or trying to explain certain things.
They also call it a cultural level. Like apparently, like when people back in the day, they just threw garbage on the street, and when they cleaned the house and all this, and it just piled up, and that's what clogged up the first floors. That's an official explanation.
The light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, that's me filming. That's an amazing. That's my amazing cinematography.
But yeah, there's so many more buildings to explore in Montreal, and I'm looking forward to talking about some different ones to show you a bit of what I see as proof of definitely something older going on, and that doesn't fit the narrative. So it's a really fascinating.
So some of the buildings we're going to
subject.
see in the future, what we're going to talk about.
Like the old Royal Bank building on Saint-Jacques, St. James. We have a lot of beautiful churches also, to talk about, whether it's Marie Reine du Monde, Mary Queen of the World on René Lévesque. That's an exact copy of St. Peter's in Vatican. Like, well, that's interesting. Exact copy, but a third, I think something like a third, 2/3 smaller than the original ones. And so many more. So much more.
Well, Melanie, I really want to thank you for coming by on the Alex Saz Show today here in the Glen Zone studio. It's amazing to be talking and listening with you, to expand. Like I always love coming out of a conversation with knowing more, asking more questions. Knowing that you were going to be on the show today, it forced me to go look into a little bit of history myself so I could kind of hit the ground running. But now after, it looks like I'm still going to have to do some more homework and catch up more, because I like that my peripheral of awareness, you helped to expand it. And I just wanted to thank you very, very much for
My
that.
pleasure. Anytime.
Brothers and sisters, thank you for tuning in to Alex Saz Show. We're actually going to have a lot more of Melanie. We're going to cover a lot more of Montreal and other sites. We also have star forts. That's something you're going to look into. We have, what are we going to talk about? World fairs.
Oh, yeah, That's an interesting subject.
And we will do the Flat Earth show. That I promise. And it's sooner rather than later.
More to come.
More to come. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.